Good morning. It is Patrick Lovell on Sunday, March 12th, 2023 at 10 a.m. my time. Well, I'm smiling because I just thought for a second I'm late uh, or later than I thought I was. Not that I really have a schedule this morning, but it's spring forward, of course, Daylight Savings Day. So there was a reminder because I was thinking to myself, hey, isn't it supposed to be 9? It feels like 9, but it's 10. Wow. How about that? Anyway, you know, this series, this effort is, my offering to counter what is a incredible array of opportunity and choices that exists online. That are spinning some version of something that is interesting. That, for myself personally, I learn so much from people on YouTube that I discover all the time, and it's interesting in some of the cases that I have a lot of interest in, particularly financial questions and things that are kind of outside of the mainstream. And you can find and discover experts all the time that are in the industries and have podcasts and have substantial audiences, and they provide a lot of insight and intrigue. And my feed this morning is just filled with faces that I've never seen before. And I listened to a lot of new ones that provided me a lot of information and perspective and context to the intricacies of what's happening in the bank run that took place at the end of last week regarding two banks, Silvergate Bank, that was within, that had been failing for really some time because of the whole crypto madness. But Silicon Valley Bank, SVP Bank, in Silicon Valley, which has been around, and I think it's the second largest bank failure in the history of the United States, which is quite amazing, and it happened with just incredible speed. And so I was kind of catching up on all of the sorts of matriculation of data and interest from a lot of folks that are quite advanced in their understanding of the intricacies of what actually took place. And I'm going to glean some things from this particular revelation, these revelations, and pack it into what it is that really I'm all about, and what I'm trying to grow my audience and really a populist movement to deal with what a lot of what I'm about to cover says about the broader economy and ultimately the dangers that exist. That I think, we're potentially on the edge of something pretty terrifying because of a lot of things that I'm about to cover, and hopefully keep very short. But primarily, the first discovery that I had that's kind of interesting this morning are some questions as it relates to the meltdown of SVP Bank. We all know, or anybody who has any just basic context of understanding about banks in the United States, that if they have FDIC insurance, that their depositors are covered for up to $250,000. So the bank run happens because of a lot of different things that I'm not going to go into because I'm not an expert in VC, quite frankly, or in some of the tech stuff. I am, however, a little bit more astute in terms of interest rate hikes and what's been going on with the Federal Reserve and how that affects the bonds and potentially the runs and the yields and the way that just basic banking structure works. Just normal procedure that has nothing to do with fraud, for example, could potentially create this scenario, which it looks like. And a lot of people are saying this morning that the federal government may have to actually come in and do somewhat of a bailout for the, I guess, the, the folks that have put their money into Silicon Valley Bank. Because we're talking about, a huge operation, quite frankly, and a lot of VC guys with a ton of money that if they can't get their money out, and we're talking way north of $250,000, then it could create potential contagion in a variety of ways that could have further impact. And the question from those that I was listening to this morning, on one hand, some were saying, "Are you fucking kidding me? These VCs are assholes that have been living off of free money from the Fed, taking stupid risks with a lot of mechanics based on the way financialization works, where fees and upside and short term, can happen a lot of ways, particularly through private equity, which is baked into VC as well. And and so let them eat their own, cooking, right? And that's where I stand, for sure. But you know, because we're talking about billionaires with a lot of money in this bank, they're like, well, wait a second, no, you don't want that to happen because then it could create a potentially a bigger impact in, because of just the nature of intricate, interactivity between the financial system and then ultimately potentially Wall Street. So you might want to, in a case I raised the question last week, is this the new Bear Stearns? And if you know that story of Bear Stearns was the canary in the coal mine that, blew up 7 months in advance of what ultimately took down the entire global economy when Lehman went sideways. But, what we started then was a government infused bailout that started with Maiden Lane, and that was an extension of Federal Reserve Act 13.3, which the government can use in emergency scenarios to create liquidity, for the government. But it's not to backstop all manners of, let's just call it what it is, casino capitalism. Okay, and I listened to another expert this morning, talking about trying to damp down expectations and hysteria and everything else, and say, look, the government's going to do something along those lines where it uses somebody like a Chase or maybe a Wells Fargo or even a Goldman Sachs with its after they went through the whole bank holding window scenario in 2008. I can't remember the name of Goldman Sachs Bank because I think they were kind of shutting it down, but it might be an opportunity for Goldman, to kind of to sneak in with some kind of like backdoor guarantees and guarantee all of the depositors' money at this this Silicon Valley Bank, and it just brings up a lot of just incredible questions, but more importantly, incredibly frustrating and insanely infuriating sort of, I don't know, projections, if you will, that again, what I continue to tell you over and over and over is that our system has become, and I know it sounds like hyperbole, but it's not, that our economic system and our political system has merged into this corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal system, the syndicate. And if you understand what I'm talking about in terms of 2008 and potentially these questions with Silicon Valley Bank and further contagion and, let's say the Treasury or the Federal Reserve and other things that may or may not happen really in the aftermath of this whole thing, is really what I want you to hyper focus on and hopefully get behind me in this sea of voices and people that are trying to bring you information, and everybody from a different vantage of where their world works. I mean, that's just the nature of technology. We all have jobs. We all have, agendas. We all have responsibilities. And a lot of those people that are doing like I'm doing are actually doing it to further their business interests. What I'm doing is I'm trying to desperately connect with the millions upon millions of people that are confused about the structure of our economy and where we're going and how things are working, to be able to get all of us together on the same page to create a populist movement to purge corruption. And while my tone this morning is less sort of dramatic as it has been the last couple of truth bombs, it's just becoming more and more clear that, again, as soon as something begins to manifest, that these people at the hierarchy just have these like game plans that are in these strategic sort of leanings and connections, quite frankly, and methods of being able to drive interest and conversation in certain places that are so far ahead of just the common person and have so much more. The functionality of the government shouldn't serve those at the apex of a casino capitalism that is using a lot of the underhanded, deceptive acts and practices that I'm referring to be able to have the full faith and credit of the United States back them. That's not capitalism. In some ways, it's crony capitalism. In some ways, it's other aspects of it. But in the long and the short of it is, if you have a free market system and people make mistakes for whatever reason, like they did in crypto in the Silvergate Bank, and that's gone sideways and was actually failed. And that's the market. That's the risk. Billionaires, just because of the nature, this is what's so absurd about this whole thing, is that Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve chairman, has been increasing interest rates at a remarkable clip to basically, not basically, to arrest inflation. But none of these billionaires are affected by inflation, and they don't give a fuck. And so, they're like, well, wait a second, change the telemetry, lower the interest rates so we can get the bonds under control, so we can, get more liquid and that sort of thing. And it's like, wait a second, no, I mean, this is what the Federal Reserve is doing. And then on the other side of that argument, you have Elizabeth Warren and company, and Robert Reich and others, like, wait a second, no, you're hurting working people. No, the system has hurt working people over the course of the last 50 years. That has gone, global and created all sorts of trade agreements around the world that offshore the golden goose, and that we just don't have a sustainable economy. And so, what I'm going to be looking for, and very aware of, is at what point does the Fed pivot? At what does the Fed announce? Okay, here's some new quantitative easing scenarios, to try to stabilize the economy, but for whom? So, as I mentioned and demonstrated yesterday, I mean, it's like we've created, in the aftermath of the 2008 Great Financial Crisis, to where everything was over leveraged. We had derivatives that were insane, all predicated on liar's loans that created a fictional economy. And when it all blew up, the tens of millions of people that got set up in the system got railroaded in the courts, all illegally. And many of them are still dealing with this. In fact, I get stories all the time. Every other day, somebody's reaching out to me, or somebody comes to understand our work in the Con, of course, at www.thecon.tv, which lays all of this out. And they're almost like, did you know that there's servicers or foreclosure mills that are creating illegal documentation fabrication that judges are allowing in the courts, that sort of thing? And it's like, after I've seen thousands and thousands of cases like this, and it's happened to millions of people, and yet still nobody understands what's going on there. But I'll come back to that full circle. So the thing that I'm really appealing to above all else, and I'm just going to start with who I am as a person. So my DNA is anti-fascist. Now, I'm not an Antifa guy that you would see in a cartoon that has a bandana over his face throwing rocks at the cops and that sort of thing. I haven't participated in anything like that. I've grown up my whole life being very anti anything that resembles fascism, particularly in the form of brown shirts or Nazis. Why? Because I understand the history of what takes place when you don't, control the elements of hatred in a way that they don't overwhelm the system. And when they do, catastrophically tragic things happen to a lot of innocent people. And that's sort of my DNA, my outlook, and everything else. So I do everything in sort of service, if you will, ideologically, to liberty and justice for all, which is predicated on the integrity of law, which is predicated on separation of powers. And a democracy isn't capitalism, although both require free choice, supposedly, but both also require accountability, if you were to call it the free marketplace, in our choices. So, if we consume things and we get into things that are over our heads, that lead to catastrophic outcomes in our own personal economic scenario, which a lot of the times the forces that are involved there are much larger than us. For example, yesterday I demonstrated that if you happen to work for a living and you have a specific salary, it's probably not enough to keep up with the rising costs of everything that you have to be able to manage to provide for yourself and a family. And so you can get into a credit trap, and that's the way this whole thing is designed, so that basically your income is financing your debt to be able to survive in a rapidly increasing world, to where these costs are manipulated by either companies or industries, really in service to the system that we've revealed, which is called control fraud, in which CEOs, based on modern executive compensation, it can create all sorts of manipulation, theft, deceptive acts and practices as a business model, which Bernie Sanders referred to in the 2016 presidential election as fraud, and he was right, but he never explained exactly how that fraud works, which we do in a way that nobody else has. And it exists online on Apple TV and Amazon.com, but it hasn't gotten the millions upon millions of eyeballs on it because we've just basically been sent into this ocean of so many voices. Because I'm pretty sure we got clipped on one of the mass platforms like Netflix or an HBO by none other than BlackRock, who's at the apex of this whole thing. That became BlackRock because of what I mentioned earlier in this truth bomb, Maiden Lane and Federal Reserve Act 13.3. I'm not going to go into that today because I've done that plenty of times and I will in the future. But I want to try to stay on track to try to get you to understand where we are in this current moment as things are very fragile in the economy, and they have been for some time. Because after the 2008 great financial collapse, what happened and what I'm bringing to you that nobody else did, that everybody suppressed, including, and I mean this, Frontline on PBS, who's one of the greatest investigation platforms that exist, they actually hit the needle on this one, as well as Vice Media did basically a propaganda piece. And media is in on all of this stuff across the board, all of mainstream media, because mainstream media requires the system to work and function the way they've set up for the last many decades, and that leads to ultimately this insanity of this sort of what happens in this maelstrom of so much information and so many ways to be able to see so many different types of voices in our entertainment or whatever the case is. Nobody can focus on what actually is happening at the moment, and as a result of that, in mainstream media, you get this kind of high school positioning of personalities and opinions and entertainment by way of let's just make shock value and people will pay attention to it because it's over the top. And Fox primarily at this moment, for what I want to reveal at this stage of the conversation, is out of control in terms of Tucker Carlson cherry picking the 46,000 hours that he received of Capitol footage from none other than Speaker of the House McCarthy, which is all of this stuff is just complete corruption. I mean, it's just insane. We used to have separations and standards and ethics and all sorts of things that could rein this in, but it's been such a race to the bottom that you get to a situation where a guy like Tucker Carlson, who gets paid $8 million a year, to basically lie to you. And how do we know that? Well, Dominion Voting Booths have got a $1.6 billion lawsuit against Fox News, or whatever their parent company is called, and they got subpoenas to get to discovery, and they've revealed that Tucker Carlson is a duplicitous, lying son of a bitch. And I could have told you that a million times. In fact, I actually had a tiny degree of appreciation for some things that Tucker Carlson did before this last stuff. But I mean, he is off the fucking reservation in terms of his cynical, jaded, diabolical hatred of his audience, while at the same time giving them what they want. It's just fucking insane. I'm reminded of this song from the Kinks back in the 70s called "Give the People What They Want." And here Tucker Carlson is just literally lying his ass off, recreating the thing that we saw. And I watched pieces of this, and I haven't watched everything, but I only watched enough to just be like, okay, I'm never going to watch that bullshit again. Which was, okay, here's a bunch of peaceful insurrectionists walking through the Capitol because they believe in the system and they're taking pictures of themselves, and they were no threat whatsoever. And I don't know how many cops were killed. I don't know the details of all of the the insane stuff that took place on the insurrection, not to mention that they were threatening to hang Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, and also, of course, Vice President Pence, and everything else that we saw. And it's just this, these guys, it's just this tactic of psychological diffusion, and people are fucking going nuts. And I always wondered, to bring this full circle to the thing that's created who I am and my DNA is Nazi Germany. It's like, who didn't understand? I mean, we see over and over that a lot of Germans, after, Germany just got completely fucking pummeled, and the survivors, after Hitler had already committed suicide and everything that went with the Reich, they were all like, we didn't know what was happening. Bullshit. Everybody in Germany knew what was happening. You couldn't live within like 26 miles of Auschwitz and not smell, the horrific scent of like burning fucking skin sort of thing, right? And it's like everybody knew what the fuck was going on. Nobody did anything about it, and I always wondered, well, how is that possible? Well, then you get older and you get to middle age and you see a lot of things in your life, and you see complicity. You see people bury their heads and do what the man tells you, and do it, to save your own ass or your own income or whatever. And I happen to mention this on Twitter last night. I said the thing I despise above all else is cowards, because it's like, who doesn't understand history? We're in 2023. We've had wars after incredible devastation and commitment of previous generations to create, through this entire process of it, in order to form a more perfect union, to establish a democracy that has separation of powers, where the judiciary is supposed to be independent, as well as we're supposed to have functioning, institutions like the FBI and the Department of Justice that know how to do their job, as well as media, the New York Times. And so, for example, the New York Times this morning is saying, well, there's a chance that Dominion's not going to win this lawsuit, and we're not going to see more, emails in the public because of what's going to happen at the next level during the trial. And it's kind of like, wait a second, the New York Times literally is relying upon the discovery from attorneys, representing a large corporation, to sue another large corporation for its information. Aren't you the New York Times? Don't you have endless resources and genius investigators to go get this story, as you should have 18 months ago? We're only talking about the insurrection, right? And everything else that I could have alluded to. But it's another example of media is a shit show. Media has completely failed. Media is not in touch with the reality of what I opened up with and what I'll tell you time and time again. We are not a democracy. The integrity of law isn't real, to where that such that all men and all Americans are equal, and that all people are accountable under the law, especially corporations. That's not the way it works. It's a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that ultimately is socialism for the thieves, which a lot of these high-level people are talking about this morning with the case of the SVB Bank, that the government and, through the government, some too big to fail bank will come in and, guarantee all of the deposits of billionaires that are basically wagering insane gambling instead of building the real economy. It's all a facade. Who has the money? Who doesn't? Who has the power? Who doesn't? I had a conversation yesterday afternoon. Not a conversation. It was a text with somebody who I'm in contact with, who is, I think, one of the smartest people on the planet, one of the most influential people that I've come across, one of the only people that can really configure everything that I'm mentioning to you and then some in a way that is like poetry and magic to listen to. I don't agree with everything he says, because I know who I am and I know what I think about in terms of systems and everything else. I've been around the block and I know quite a bit about history. So I have a very distinct understanding of how things should work, which I believe is balance of power and integrity of the law and separation of powers and that sort of thing. And just, quite frankly, courage of individuals to keep the system going in a way where the good defeats evil. I mean, that's just, there's a platitudes, but, simply put, I mean, if you can't recognize a criminal when you get the details of what they've done and how and put the case together, then you're not doing your job if you're at the FBI, the DOJ, and that sort of thing, or the SEC. And unfortunately, that's why I had to do what I did as a television producer and investigative journalist, because I had gone through the 2008 collapse, destroyed my life, put me in a freaking god-awful position where none of it made sense. And so I started pulling the threads, and I was able to find the money to be able to go do the investigation. And lo and behold, it took me years and years and years and millions of dollars to accomplish. But we did what all of these institutions failed to do, and that includes media. And they all have budgets. I mean, if you just look at the budgets at the FBI, the DOJ, the SEC, and others, I mean, we're talking north of $70 billion a year. I can assure you I didn't have a $70 billion budget. to get the $29 trillion truth, which took place in 2009, which is now north of $72 trillion, which is this fucking system, this Goliath corruption that continues to maintain the interest of the 1% or the top 0.001% while everybody else is expendable. And I'm like, no more, enough. And so that's why I'm reaching out to you directly to implore you to get involved with this campaign, for you to donate $13. And the reason I chose 13 as a number, I've done a lot of truth bombs on this, but it's just simply ultimately in honor of the 13 original colonies that revolted against the tyranny of King George to create the United States of America that ultimately led to the Bill of Rights and the Constitution that create in order to form a more perfect union. You look back at the great dialogue or the quotes of Thomas Jefferson, it's a great system if you can keep it. And it's experiment, and will they be able to keep it? Well, we're right in the midst of it. And ultimately, the person I talked to yesterday, who's one of the top minds in the United States, he's not from the United States, one of the top minds in the world who knows this stuff inside and out, and I provided him information to where, and I was actually on a video call with him, and I saw his face light up and go, you got to be kidding me. And it was the information that I'm providing you about Federal Reserve Act 13.3 and what it did illegally. And backdoors, and because he's a smart guy and he understands, policy and the law and that sort of thing, it registered with him, and he was just like, oh my God. And so we're working together to bring this to a much broader audience, but here's the skinny. He got attacked on Friday by fascist thugs, as it turns out. Yeah, he's in the hospital. I don't know how bad it was. I just got a message from him late last night where he informed me that, I apologize that I haven't been able to move recently. I'm in the hospital with a broken nose and I think a broken jaw, and I got attacked by thugs. And then I found out that they were part of a fascist movement, and that's part and parcel to what I continue to tell you. Corruption births fascism, and it's on the move. If you're looking at the Twitter files and everything that took place that led to yesterday's revelation for me that Elon Musk is literally all in on what Tucker Carlson is saying. I used to have insane respect and admiration for Elon Musk. Now I'm a little bit horrified by the guy. I was kind of like, is he what they're saying he is? And then all of a sudden he's like all in on backing Tucker. And then of course we saw him with Rupert Murdoch at the Super Bowl. I mean, like, come on. When you put billionaires together with the operations of somebody like Eric Prince at Blackwater, who's a billionaire himself, I think, at least his family is, the DeVos family. But Blackwater was mercenaries that worked from, basically after 9/11 throughout the Middle East. And these guys are filled with just former, probably special ops guys, the best of the best that were trained in the U.S. military that become mercenaries and then work for billionaires. Those guys were on the streets during the Black Lives Matter and elsewhere in unmarked cars and unmarked uniforms, armed to the teeth, throwing protesters during Black Lives Matter into vans and then, taking off with them. It's like, what the fuck? And then William Barr, the former Attorney General of the United States, was like, yeah, that's what we're doing. And then there was never really any massive, follow-up that I saw in media. It was like, oh my God, this happened. And then it lasted for like a day and then nobody talked about it. And it's like, wait a second, that's on the streets of the United States? That's what you would expect to see in some sort of revolution in Venezuela or, South America or other things that we've seen around the world where it's like these Stasi-like scenarios are happening, and it's happening here in the United States. Now add up everything else that I'm talking about, and you've got yourself a combustible engine that could lead to one of the great wipeouts in history. Like, the other thing that I think that we need to be paying attention to is because of the financial turmoil, because of the, obviously the political turmoil, but ultimately, we've got this situation happening in Ukraine and a nuclear finger itchy, Putin, and he's dealing with whatever he's dealing with, and all of this stuff. I mean, when I think about it in terms of like World War I and what started World War I and all of the different elements that seem to be disparate, but at the same time, they just triggered, there could be a massive calamity in the very near future. And I kind of expect it, quite frankly. And I'm just telling you, okay, that the United States can't exist like this. We cannot allow it to exist like this. It's an abomination of everything we think we are, of what we're supposed to be. And it's happening because you're overwhelmed, you're paralyzed, you do not know what to do. I know what to do. I know exactly how the fuck all of this shit happened. And who am I? Well, I'm a guy that they've suppressed to make sure you don't understand or millions don't understand what I know, because then it would be a threat to the system. But fuck them. It's going to blow up. And there's going to be massive calamity. And I'm trying to get all of you, those of you who are victims of this stuff to begin with, and and obviously those who are about to become victims of this stuff. I'm asking you for a $13 contribution. Why? Because $13 is less than you would go spend on yourself at a fast food restaurant for a value meal now. It's insane. But it's also your buying. You have to buy, and I'm asking you to share this information with 13 people so that we can organically grow a movement, and it's a tidal wave populist movement to purge corruption. How are we going to do that? Well, we got to get to different mile markers, right? So my first objective is $16,900. If we get to $16,900, we're going to get organized. We'll get a 501c4. We'll get the proper legal work. We'll get the proper website development. Possibly I'll pay the $5,000 fee for to the Federal Election Commission to put my name on the ballot. Well, at least to say that I'm running for president, because there's a lot more that has to happen after that, which would require attorneys and everything else. And just to get started and get organized and to start really create a marching scenario. But what my objective is if we can get to 1,300 contributors to 16,900, we get organized, and then the next threshold would be 13,000. So that'd be 13,000 contributors would give us $169,000, which would then elevate the opportunity of more and more of what we're going to do. But my end game is I want to create a modern day revivalist, barnstorming tour to resuscitate the American dream, to purge corruption based on the facts and the evidence that all of this fucking misinformation and tidal wave of overwhelming information, particularly the lies and the deception that come from the mainstream media and aren't being vetted out by our journalistic institutions like the New York Times, because they're all in on it. Nobody's going to tell you the information that it took me years and years and years and millions of dollars to realize, which involves all the top level people at the FBI, the DOJ, the SEC, and AGs around the country, as well as whistleblowers at the highest levels, that we put all of this evidence together to be able to do what we refer to as basically a Pecora hearing that took place. A Pecora hearing is what took place after the Great Depression that ultimately radicalized the government into using its power to create laws to rein in corruption. That's what they did. And that's what we have to do now if you want a functioning society that's democratic, where everybody has a say, where everybody has an opportunity, because otherwise what we're looking down is the barrel of fascism. The thing about fascism is that it's so organized, and it's got a built-in DNA-like structure to where, thousands and thousands of years of, let's just call it, the patriarchy and, what took place in churches in terms of hierarchy. It's a part of society's DNA in a lot of ways. And of course, it took the United States to break that with a bunch of ambitious individuals to try to create, the law of separation of powers, so that, of course, Jefferson said it's a great system if you can keep it. And he also said, of course, that the blood of the tree of liberty has to be refreshed with the blood of both tyrants and patriots from time to time for the system to exist. I completely understand and agree with what he's saying, but I'm not promulgating an actual bloody revolution. I'm promulgating this sort of, it's got to be like almost like an atomic bomb and a nuclear reaction of truth that gets everybody who's out there in the netherworlds, who sees homeless people every day under the underpasses, who are struggling, with inflation to try to keep a roof over their head and everything else. And they're just basically on the edge of disaster every given moment that leads to all sorts of problems. I mean, it's financial terrorism that blows up the American dream. If you're a married couple and you're squabbling about money 24/7 and you don't know what you're going to do with your children, and then all of a sudden some grand, economic turmoil happens and everybody goes by the wayside. I mean, trust me, the last time, I am absolutely convinced we had a Great Depression in 2008 for everybody who didn't get bailed out. And what I'm trying to tell you is what I know. They got bailed out illegally. They got bailed out illegally because if you understand the statutes of Federal Reserve Act 13.3, which allows the Federal Reserve to be the lender of last resort in emergency circumstances, the statutes aren't written to protect criminal operations. You know that. I mean, seriously, you got to be smart enough to understand that we don't design the laws of this country to guarantee, with the full faith and credit of the United States, a massive racketeering enterprise that sets up tens of millions of people based on a fictional economy, to where the short term creates all sorts of thieves for the fuckers that are doing all of this stuff, to ultimately blow everybody up, and then ultimately uses the courts to do it with illegal documents. That's how absurd this is. That's the world we live in. We are a third world nation. We're a banana republic with nuclear weapons. And right now, probably one of the only aspects of the United States government and economy that probably is functioning very well is the military-industrial complex getting ready for war. There's a better outcome than a nuclear war right now. And by the way, what would we be fighting for overseas? I mean, I feel terrible for the people in Ukraine and all of the things that are happening there because of the aggression by Putin and the Russians. But I'm not going to make an absolute declaration about my position on the war, regarding Ukraine and Putin. I certainly don't want to see it escalated any worse than it already has. But my biggest focus and fear is what's happening in the United States. We're on the verge of a civil war. We're on the verge of this country falling apart even more than it already has. And it's not really a civil war. It's just going to be a right-wing autocratic takeover. The left, like Matt Taibbi said, is toothless. The left is in silos. The left depends on budgets to, foment whatever that specific issue is without cross-pollinating to these economic issues. And nobody on the left is willing to embrace the understanding of corruption. I know those that should have years ago who were at the apex of this stuff, and they refuse to reveal the corruption that I revealed to you. I get bits and pieces of clues out in social media. Like, for example, I was listening and I posted on Twitter the other day a woman who came out of the Dallas Federal Reserve. Her last name is D. Martino Booth. And she just let the cat out of the bag. She said, look, everybody knows that what the Federal Reserve did was illegal and corrupt. But what she doesn't do is tell you it's Federal Reserve Act 13.3 based on the backdoor scenario with Hank Paulson and Ben Bernanke and Timothy Geithner. While they sold the world, basically lies through Congress, through what was known as the Troubled Assets Relief Program. The whole thing's a lie. The whole thing's going to blow up. That's what happens. That's Humpty Dumpty. Don't we remember our children's parables, right? Look, the long and the short of it, the end of this, is that it's the emperor's new clothes. We've got the answers. We need millions of you to aggregate and march forward with us and to help us. And a rising tide will raise all ships. And we can defeat the Borg of evil. We can. With the light of truth. We can do it. We have it. We just have to have your buy-in. And if you can find $13 right now, don't wait. Do it now. But more importantly, I don't want more than $13. I want you to donate $13 and then get 13 people to donate $13, and let's just see what happens. If we can get to $16,900, we can get to $169,000. We can get to $1.69 million. We can get to $169 million. If we got to $169 million, let me tell you, we would have the attention of the country where we could finally basically overwhelm the sea of lies and madness with the truth. I don't fancy myself Moses. I'm not saying I'm parting the Red Sea. I don't fancy myself Jesus Christ. I don't walk on water. I don't talk to God, okay? But I promise you that we need something that biblical to be able to overwhelm the darkness. And the darkness is in ourselves. Think about how many professionals, if you're a professional out there and I got your attention and you stuck around this long, think about all the professionals that are involved with this and they know it. And they're so cynical and jaded. They're like, what are you going to do, man? I got my Porsche in the garage. I've got, my kids going to college. I've got to, take out some loans for that. I got paid, I've got my retirement, my 401k, and I've got my, money. Yeah, I'm in it. And what you're saying is true, but I'm not going to go against the grain because I'm all in. Yeah, that's problematic. So you're probably not going to be the guy that gives us $13. For all of the rest of you, that guy is fucking pissing on your head telling you it's rain, you're the guy that needs to pay $13 because I'm the only one who's going to champion your voice. Onwards and upwards.